Thank you. Thanks. Thank you for coming to have this conversation with me. I know that I think this is the last session of the day before the Forecast Awards, and then after that, the networking event. Looking forward to spending some time continuing this conversation this evening over some giant Jenga or some big buck hunter. But being the last session of the day, I'll dive right in so we can move through this. My name is Austin Murphy. I'm the Director of Incident Response for CrowdStrike Services, responsible for delivering forensics and breach investigation for our customers. Before my time at CrowdStrike, I was at EY as an incident responder in the Advanced Security Center. And before my time in the private sector as a consultant, I was in the Air Force as a cybersecurity officer, focusing on network attack tactics development. So from kind of all of my time from my undergrad through today has been focused on some flavor of computer network attack or defense. I've had the opportunity to consult with dozens of different customers, not only performing breach investigation, incident response work, but also proactive work and kind of assisting with increasing the overall posture of information security strategy. And it's an area that I'm really passionate about. And kind of when I talk about information ops, to kind of break that down a little bit, what we're going to talk about, the components of an information security strategy, kind of prevention, detection, response. I kind of put prevention over here and say this is the responsibility of your infrastructure and your architecture, and then you've got detection and response, and that's the responsibility of your team. And that's what I call security ops. So I think this is a very important component of a strategy, and it's also very hard to do well, and that's why I spend so much time focusing in this space and why I'm kind of passionate about it, and also why I want to talk today about having a framework to really kind of change the way that we maybe think about this and the way we kind of plan our team around it. So I'm going to talk about this threat detection framework and talk about what it is. At a high level, we'll talk together about how to build one. We're going to talk about how what the values of having one would be for your team, and what you're going to get out of having it. In order to kind of get started here, what I'd like to ask is, like everyone here, I'm just going to put some quotes up on the screen, and I want to kind of get us all on the same page talking about the problems that we face. So if you do me a favor and just kind of nod if you agree with these sentences. We're just going to put a couple of quotes up, and just tell me if you agree with these when we're talking about information security operations and kind of the challenge of doing this well. Right, so I'd say first, there's no single technology that's going to be your silver bullet. You're going to be working with different types of technology, and they kind of need to play together to have a successful strategy. And the work of the folks that are in the room here, and at the DFIR Summit, we're the kind of the practitioners. We fundamentally speak a different language from business leadership, and that can be tricky to navigate, right? But we definitely use different words to talk about the problems that we face. Vendors lie about the things that they sell you. Some. Our networks are getting more complicated. BYOD, Internet of Things, globalization, teleworking. It's drastically changing the way we think about our networks. The networks themselves are getting more complicated, and therefore the task of securing them is also getting kind of more complicated as well, and this is getting harder to do well. PCI is not enough. If we're talking about a strategy that involves people and process and technology, I would argue that the people and the process components are more important than the actual tech. That might be kind of counter to what you may be hearing if you're talking to your resellers that are selling tech. They're not selling process and tech and people. But I think it's very important that we kind of focus on the people and the process components. And kind of the final statement here before we dive into it, that technology by itself is not a strategy. And I bring this up and kind of bring it home because I've had this conversation with a lot of CISOs where just kind of casually say, so tell me about what you're doing. What's your information security strategy look like? To have them rattle off the things that they've purchased. They say, well, we've got this endpoint product, this network sensor, here's the antivirus that we use. And and that's their strategy. They don't talk about how these capabilities are deployed. They don't talk about how their teams are using those capabilities, what kind of processes they have in place, how their teams are organized, trained, and equipped in order to really bring the capability to their customer, which is the business, to decrease risk. And that is kind of the heart of why I started to kind of create this concept of the threat detection framework, because I felt like there was a gap in the space for how we're using technology to kind of really decrease risk to the business. So that is what the TDF is. It's an important concept that allows us to kind of map the various inputs that we face in our process to really get clarity of action. So in the military, every system that's developed or improved upon has a concept of operations documentation, ConOps. What a ConOps is it describes a system from the vantage point of those that will use the system. And that's what your SOC is. It's a system, it's a collection of processes. And the actors in this process are your analysts. So they've got inputs, they execute playbooks, they handle incidents with the goal of providing a service to the customer, which is the business. The business makes an investment in the SOC to get that risk reduction, kind of to put it at the macro layer, how we think of the SOC as a system, and how a collection of tools is not going to get us there by themselves. We need to kind of think about this more holistically from start to finish. So as I kind of stated on the previous slide, that what we need is a documentation framework which will really kind of connect us from the technology that we have to the goals that we want to achieve, aligned from kind of what's important to in our vertical or in our business, and allow us to really translate that technical language that we all speak about the things that we do and map that to use cases, kind of things that are important to those that pay our bills. And that's going to be different for different types of organizations. An engineering organization, might get a lot of value out of a well-tuned DLP solution, but that might not really be that important in a retail space where they're focused on transaction processing. And likewise, something like a network-based anomaly detection system might be really valuable in an ICS space, but that's not probably going to be beneficial in something more heterogeneous like a university campus LAN. So by really kind of focusing on what matters to your business is how we kind of unlock the value of the technology that we've purchased. So to get started, and we're going to keep this really simple, to get started we want to really kind of think about this, to build a threat detection framework. And by the way, I call it a threat detection framework because if I submitted a talk for the threat detection Excel spreadsheet, they wouldn't have accepted it. So we start by basically taking an inventory of all the sources of information that we have available to our analysts. So that's, if you have a SIM, you'd want to start with all of your inputs, all your log inputs that you have in your SIM. Think about the various panes of glass that your analysts use, the other tools that they use, the other detection systems that they have available to them. Also think about the things that aren't traditionally centralized or correlated, like your asset database from IT or change management, kind of trouble ticketing thing, anything that could be of value to your analysts. You're going to want to inventory that and start by just creating a list. And I'm not advocating that we log all the things, but we want to start with kind of a full canvas of everything that we would have at our disposal in order to have a thoughtful conversation about what needs to be logged, correlated, and why. Next, we're really going to want to start to add some context and some definition around the things that we have available to us, and we're going to start mapping that to what we kind of talk about as use cases or detections. So this is saying, okay, I've got a log source, I've got authentication logs. What can I do with that? How can I turn that into a detection? This is not rocket science. This is pretty straightforward. We're just kind of laying it down and formally describing what we already know we can do with this type of stuff. We can look for brute force attacks, account spray attacks. We can look for, we can detect off of all these lovely things. But we kind of start building this out, and at this phase, it's really, it's okay to have overlaps. We're just kind of brainstorming here. So we'll have overlaps, we'll have gaps. You're going to want to talk about all the things you currently detect on. You're also going to want to talk about all the things that you'd love to detect on, but maybe you can't. So at this point, we're just brainstorming still. So thinking about the use cases that you care about to really kind of start to build out a much larger map of the things that you can do. This is supposed to be a bit of an eye chart, so don't worry about if you can't see it. I just kind of wanted to give an example of how this really can grow some legs and start to become much more involved as you build things out. You want to be as granular as you can with this and get very specific, but also trying to describe your use cases in as plain of language as you can, because this is going to be your Rosetta Stone for talking to the other areas that don't speak our language. So at this point in our exercise, we're going to want to start to do two things. First, we're going to start putting things into groups. We want to categorize things. So if we have 50 use cases or 100 use cases, we want to start to logically group them either by maybe phases of the kill chain or by the area of the threat vector source. Might be another grade. It doesn't necessarily matter what categories you choose, but by putting them into categories, we've now started to describe the pillars that make up our security monitoring strategy. So that we could say, what are you currently looking for? And you say, well, we focus on these 4 areas, and this is what we're doing, right? So now that we have all of our use cases mapped into categories, the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to map them to playbooks. In the talk right before this one, Andrew gave a great example of, the value of a playbook when we're talking about conducting a mobile forensic investigation. And that was great to see that, and I think that is the type of content that should be created for all of the other things that our SOC is looking for, so that we're really, once again, focused on connecting the dots from the technical alert data that we get as it comes in to, we use a use case to add some value and turn it into a detection, and then from that detection, we map it through the process that our analysts are going to go through from an incident handling perspective. This is also now the time when we want to engage management, right? So this is when we ask for inputs. It's a very powerful conversation once you have this to then kind of pause and have a conversation with leadership and say, would you please prioritize these? What matters most to our company, and what would you kind of put as last on the list if we had to put these from top to bottom and rank order them? By doing that, we're going to unlock a lot of value in just kind of the relationship between the way that the executives think about the SOC that they purchase and the way that the analysts are kind of adding value by executing the strategy. This kind of goes back to that commander's intent or the ConOps document. And we'll talk a little bit more about the benefit of that in a bit. The other nice thing you get here is you start to really outline where your value comes from when we're looking at the data sources that we're having. If you go through this whole exercise and you find out that you've purchased that you're spending thousands of dollars a month on paying for hardware and licensing because you're retaining this very granular log source in your SIM, and you find that it doesn't map to any use cases that you care about, or it maps to use cases that were deemed medium or low priority. Here's an opportunity to actually become a little bit more efficient. Maybe don't renew that purchase or reprioritize where your budget is. It's about thinking about information security strategy or security monitoring strategy given the constraints that are placed upon you by the fact that we all have to work under a budget. So I haven't answered the question yet of kind of what's the point of all this, right? So Peter Drucker, kind of a management guru, he was famous. He was the first to kind of pen the quote, "If you can't measure it, you can't manage it." And when I think about measuring the value of an information security team or security ops team, that's probably one of the more challenging things you can try and do and really answer the tough questions of, say, are we more secure today than we were 6 months ago? That's a question that I've had to try to answer. I'm sure a lot of people in this room have probably tried to answer that. And that's a tough one to answer. Answer questions of, how many people do I need to have on my SOC? Do I need to hire another person, or do we have too many people on staff? What's the real value that I'm getting as a return? We're paying $1.7 million worth of annual expenditures for all this licensed technology and these people to sit in a room with big screens, and they work 24/7, and we don't really know what they do. Like, how do you really measure that? And the other thing, kind of move on to the second quote, Rob Lee, not the one that's here today, the one that will be here tomorrow. A friend of mine at ArchCon last year, someone was giving a presentation, and he said that the cyber kill chain is not a valuable tool for defending our networks, and it needs to be rethought, thrown away. And Rob got all upset. He stood up and he kind of like pounded his fist on the table in the middle of the presentation, and he said, "If you don't think it's valuable, then you don't understand it, and you have no business saying that." It was kind of a heated exchange. It was kind of exciting. And he said, it's valuable because we get inherent value out of putting things into buckets. And I didn't really get it at the time. Thought maybe he started drinking a little too early in the day. But it was a couple weeks later. I was chatting with him again the second time. We started talking about that again, and the light bulb went off for me when I realized that if you can take these things that are extremely difficult to measure, because by themselves there's no quantitative or there's no quantifiable way to evaluate them. If you can even just put them into categories and put them into a bucket, now it's something you can count. And if you can put it in a bucket and count it, then you could count it again next quarter and you could see what's different. And if you can count it over a quarter or over time, you can trend things out and you can start to graph things. And now you can start to answer much more meaningful questions about risk, where you talk about, are we detecting things earlier in the kill chain? Are we detecting more things that we care about? And really having that kind of meaningful conversation about how to measure the value of the investment that we make when we have a security ops team. So the threat detection framework at its core, what we try to do with this is take all of these inputs that are very hard to measure, they're constantly changing, our goals are constantly moving, and really focus them so that we're using them for the right purpose, and we're using them aligned with our customers, our business priorities. And this then becomes a lens in which you kind of view the world. And I promise you, if you go through an exercise like this, you'll start to use this framework as a way to really solve a lot of other problems about which tools you need to purchase, what's a better fit, how many people do you need to have on staff, how do you report metrics. You'll start to get a lot of value out of this if you start to kind of put this together. It will become kind of that window that you view the world through. So I'm going to talk through some of the benefits of having this kind of in place. And we already talked about this at a high level, but to kind of focus and enumerate it a little bit. The first benefit is getting that executive sponsorship for your program. If you talk about your capabilities using the language that your management cares about, you're going to unlock a lot of value. Like first on day one, you're going to become more valuable to your company because you are now agreed on what is important. And now you can focus those efforts on the things that you have been told by your business are important. And deprioritize the things that are not important. The second, you're going to be more valuable simply because you're better understood. When you communicate your capabilities using someone else's language that they speak, they understand you better, and you're going to win more in negotiations. This becomes a tool for you to advocate for budget. Make requests for change. But just kind of put it more simply, if you're using someone else's language to talk to them, you're going to be more effective at getting that support and sponsorship. Two, as we talked a little bit earlier, is metrics. It's kind of a personal pet peeve of mine. The state of information security metrics is a little bit disappointing to me, and I think the reason is that so many people that are leaders in this space, they came from a traditional career where they spent the past 20 years working in IT, and now they've kind of switched over to information security, and they're still living in the world of like service-oriented architecture and ITIL. And I've seen SOCs that are reporting up to the C-suite and the board. That are reporting like mean time between incident. What is that valuable? Mean time to remediation. Number of tickets in the queue, or like how many tickets are closed per analyst per week. Like I don't think not only would these types of metrics, in my opinion, be potentially useless, they can be harmful. And I've seen that what you measure, it becomes what you encourage. So if you have a SOC that's incentivized to close tickets, they're going to close more tickets faster. And that doesn't really tell us anything meaningful about whether or not risk has been reduced. Like what are we doing here if we're just closing tickets? And if we have more tickets to close, is that good or bad? I don't know. But by having this TDF in place, this kind of allows us to really have much more meaningful conversation about risk. So if we're kind of defining the things that we can count and measuring how they change over time, we're not only talking about the work that we do, which is, close tickets, that's great, but we can also talk about the new ways that we're improving the overall capability. So what I mean by that is, are we adding new detections to the framework? Are we thinking proactively about new ways to look for interesting things to try and solve, hunting and active defense, et cetera. And then also, are we engaging our automation teams and IT to change our architecture so that we're actually decreasing the crap that flows through our SOC? If you're constantly solving the same problem over and over and over, you're kind of doing it wrong, and you should be focusing on, okay, how can I automate this away? How can we block and prevent this so that team of humans can focus on what humans do best, execute judgment and think creatively. Threat intelligence. So most of the teams that I've worked with are at a maturity level where they can get some good value out of threat intel data, but are probably not mature enough to get real good value out of actual threat intel content, which is kind of the full contextualized report about, what an actor is maybe interested in, or stories about how they're, conducting campaigns. That's always interesting to read and always makes for great water cooler conversation, but it's not really until you have a good documented baseline for what you're monitoring for, what you're detecting on, and how you're handling incidents that you can kind of really get to the heart of how to get value out of threat intel data. So I'm sure a lot of people in this room, for example, maybe after the Sony breach happened, maybe had a member of the board of directors or someone in the C-suite ask the question, say, well, what would happen if that happened here? I'm assuming that you guys have had that question. I've answered that a couple times. If you don't have kind of a documented baseline of what you do, that's a really difficult question to answer. But if you have a threat detection framework, now this becomes an exercise in kind of lining up what we know about that breach with what we're currently looking for, and you can have a fantastic answer that says, well, here's what I know about that breach. There's 6 phases to that kill chain, and we have detections right now in place that would have alerted on 3 of them, giving us an opportunity to respond to that before it ever became a problem. Or maybe the answer is, nope, we wouldn't have detected it. We would have missed it. But that gives you at least now you have a tool that can be used to move that conversation forward in a way that just doesn't end up with you getting fired. Instead you can say, well, we don't have the ability to really respond to something that serious in our organization. But if we made the following changes, if we introduced some technology, or if we made some baseline configurations, or if we introduced some of these detections, then we would be set up in the future, and it allows you to still use that story to advance, the state of your, the posture of your team. So kind of what I described there it was kind of a small example of a tabletop exercise. Sometimes you do those impromptu when someone just casually asks, say, what would happen if Edward Snowden did that here? Maybe you know, maybe you don't. That's in a way that's kind of a tabletop exercise. But what I would kind of ask is that you stop doing those until you really have baseline and have a TDF in place. And an example is you wouldn't build a car. You wouldn't build an automobile and then put a crash test dummy in it and then slam it into a wall at 65 miles an hour without first having engineering blueprints to understand how it crashed and how to do it better. And you wouldn't. The picture I have there of a fire alarm, you wouldn't spend $1 million and wire up a building and have a whole fire alarm system with bells and whistles and flashing lights and install it on a weekend, and then on Monday morning just come in and pull the thing and see how people react. You wouldn't do that. To be a waste. I mean, it might be kind of fun just to see it, everyone shriek and run, but you'd first kind of want to start by saying, hey guys, we're gonna baseline what we do here. Here's exit A, here's exit B, we got muster points in the parking lot, you go there, you check in with so-and-so. Then you have the exercise to see how well it worked. And once you have a threat detection framework kind of documented out, once you've set your baseline up, these become a lot more valuable. When you have a pen test, when you have a red team, if you have this framework in place first, now every finding that they have along the way is now a direct opportunity for you to plug that hole in a really meaningful, tactical way, instead of just saying wow, here's a report, these guys destroyed us. So you're going to get a lot more value out of these other products that you're probably already, or these other exercises you're probably already doing. Just like pen testing and tabletop exercises, I kind of put them on the spectrum of active defense. And when I say active defense, I'm not talking about taking offensive actions against an attacker. I'm talking about the kind of the spectrum of things that you do as a defender to proactively, think about defense. So active defense being the spectrum. On the passive end of the spectrum, you have your infrastructure. You've got the things that kind of automatically block and tackle and prevent and alert. And then on the more active side of the house, you've got your things like honeypots and canary tokens or things like that. Once again, you probably shouldn't be engaging in that until you have a good baseline of playbooks and a detection framework in place. But once you have that in place, they can be a really meaningful way for you to fill gaps. A really great way for you to say okay, I know exactly what I'm detecting, and I can sprinkle in these active defense measures to fill the gaps, to really kind of give me a much better strategy. And the last thing that I'll talk about from a benefit is really on the hunting side of the house. And when I talk to people and they tell me that they have a hunting team or they're doing hunting, I think about 75% of the time they're actually not hunting by kind of what I would define as hunting. You know, when I ask that follow-up question and say, okay, so you're hunting, what does that mean? What are you actually doing? And I'll get kind of usually one of two types of answers. One is, well, we got this list of IP addresses, and then we take it and we proactively hunt through our logs looking for matches. And I say, well, that's not really hunting. That's really just manually doing what should kind of be automated by your SOC. And then the second one is, the more technical analysts will say, we've got this script, and we run it across the entire environment, and we're going to parse a bunch of registry keys, and we pull it back, and we stack it up, and we look for the anomalies. And I wouldn't say that's hunting either. Although this morning, our keynote speaker, Troy, talked about doing that at scale in Azure, and it's pretty cool. That was it's an important thing to do, but I think the hunting is really the exercise that originally gave you the first idea. It's not when you're doing it in a repeated manner. Once you have that good idea, you should find a way to automate it and get it into your detection stack so that your hunters can think about the next idea and really be doing what humans do well, which is thinking creatively and executing judgment. Hunting can be used within your SOC to fight off analyst fatigue, too. That's another great tool. If you got someone who's just closing tickets in a SOC and having them spend 1 day out of every 5 thinking creatively about planning, briefing, executing, and then conducting kind of a debrief session with the stated focus on having the output of your hunt be a way of automating that and bringing that into our automation kind of framework here. And the output of your automation, obviously you got 2 outputs. One is you have incidents that are handled by your analysts that are going to execute judgment and close out those by using their playbooks. But the second is metrics. And the purpose of metrics is to advocate for changes in your infrastructure so you can kind of continuously push stuff in this model, push it to the right. Because pushing it to the right means decreasing cost and allowing your people to think more creatively and focus on the things on the left, which you need people for, which, creatively thinking about hunting and executing judgment. So that's it. That's really the concept of the threat detection framework. Kind of wrapped up. We can do questions?
So we have a hard time actually documenting incidents. So what sort of interface and what sort of features should an analyst have that they're going to want to interact with to document an incident? Because typical ticket tracking software really doesn't work in order to generate the metrics that you need.
Yeah. So when we talk about documenting incident handling, I think what you want to do is first define what type of metrics you want to create and back into it. So some of the things that I always think are important is thinking about what are the categories that you would want to track from a root cause perspective. So the end of what would you want to say is your story at the end of the quarter or at the end of a 6-month period? You'd want to say, well, we did this number of these things, and maybe we could talk about the root cause. So you can, the value of metrics is to influence change. So what you want to have is a story that says, if we made this change and made this investment in our infrastructure, this is what we may be able to prevent in the future. And then you're talking in the terms of risk reduction, cost reduction. So then kind of start by what's the story you want to tell, and then find a way to capture that, so back into that from a reporting perspective.
There you go.